The smell hit me first. Blood mixed with gasoline from the four-wheeler still running nearby, its engine coughing in the humid night air. Then I saw her, dragging something heavy through the tall grass behind my property line, the blades parting. Under the weight, Karen Fitzgerald, our HOA president, had a rifle slung over her shoulder, her silhouette stark against the moonlight. She was hauling what looked suspiciously like the hindquarters of my prize Angus steer, Bruno. That's when I knew this woman had crossed a line she could never uncross. Let me back up. My name's Jake Morrison, 45 years old, a former undercover narcotics officer from Chicago with 20 years of dodging bullets and busting dealers under my belt. I'd seen my share of corruption cartels, dirty cops, you name it, but nothing prepared me for Pine Valley Estates. 3 months ago, I moved here after my uncle passed, leaving me his 15-acre slice of paradise, a modest ranch house, a stock pond, and enough pasture for a small herd of cattle. I was ready for peace, a place to decompress before starting my new job. What I didn't know was that Pine Valley had fallen under the iron fist of Karen Fitzgerald, a former real estate agent turned HOA president who made Stalin look like a pushover. Karen had turned our quiet community into her personal fiefdom. She'd installed security cameras on every street corner, claiming they were for neighborhood safety, but everyone knew they were her eyes, watching our every move. She'd fine a veteran in a wheelchair $100 because his ramp wasn't the approved shade of beige. She once tried to evict a young family because their golden retriever barked during her unauthorized 3 a.m. property inspections. The woman was a walking caricature of power gone mad, her laminated HOA badge her scepter, her golf cart with HOA patrol painted on the side her chariot. Trouble started 2 weeks after I moved in. I noticed fresh tire tracks cutting through the dew-soaked grass leading to my pond, and several of my largemouth bass were missing. The pond was my pride and joy, stocked with fish I'd raised from fingerlings. A little piece of tranquility after years of urban chaos. The next morning, there she was at my door, all 5 feet 2 of entitled fury, her blonde bob perfectly coiffed, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "your pond is classified as a community water feature under subsection 1B of the HOA Charter. All aquatic life is subject to HOA oversight." I pulled out my property deed, which clearly showed the pond was on my land. She didn't blink, just pointed to her badge like it was a federal warrant. "The charter supersedes your deed," she snapped. "You need to comply." We were at an impasse, her staring me down like I was some rookie she could intimidate, me wondering how a suburban HOA had turned into a mafia shakedown. That night, I installed trail cameras around my property, the kind I'd used in narcotics, stings to catch dealers in the act. What I captured over the next few weeks would have been comedy gold if it wasn't so infuriating. Karen, sometimes alone, sometimes with her spineless husband, Carl, a balding accountant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, would sneak onto my land. After dark, they'd fish my pond with the precision of commercial poachers, loading coolers with largemouth bass and bluegill. One video showed Karen measuring a fish against an HOA-approved ruler before tossing it into her bucket, her fluorescent vest glowing under the moonlight. Another clip caught Carl standing guard with a flashlight, his face a mix of boredom and fear, while Karen worked a commercial-grade net like she was auditioning for a fishing show. They even had a pulley system rigged to haul their heavy coolers up the hill to their golf cart, which was parked just beyond my property line. The footage was unreal. Karen would arrive in her HOA patrol golf cart, clipboard in hand, acting like she was conducting official business. One night, my camera caught her on the phone, her voice clear enough to pick up every word. "Yes, 40 pounds of bass this week," she said, her tone smug. "No, the owner hasn't noticed. I told you. The HOA Charter gives us resource management authority." She was selling my fish, turning my pond into her personal profit machine. I started keeping a log, documenting every theft. In 2 weeks, they'd taken roughly 300 pounds of fish, nearly to $1,000 at market prices. Stolen property, plain and simple. I called the sheriff's office, expecting action. Instead, the deputy, who showed up, a young guy with a nervous twitch, seemed more interested in warning me about HOA compliance than taking my report. "You need to understand, Mr. Morrison," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Mrs. Fitzgerald has a lot of influence around here. Maybe you should stock your pond with something else, something the HOA doesn't classify as a community resource." That's when I realized how deep this went. Karen's network of intimidation stretched beyond the neighborhood into the local power structure. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd gotten greedy. I confronted her at the next HOA meeting, held in the community center's stuffy conference room, where a dozen browbeaten neighbors sat in folding chairs, avoiding eye contact. Karen stood at the front, her badge gleaming, her smile as fake as her authority. I presented my evidence printouts of my deed, photos of the tire tracks, even a still from my trail camera showing her with a net. She didn't flinch. "Your pond connects to the community drainage system," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of a dictator. "That makes all aquatic life community property. Per Article 17, Paragraph 4. I asked to see this article." She claimed the documents were being updated and unavailable. The other board members, a mix of retirees and yes men, just nodded like trained dogs. The room was silent, the air thick with fear. That's when things escalated. I woke one morning to find my fence 6 feet of sturdy wire I'd installed myself cut with surgical precision, the kind of clean slices only bolt cutters could make. My small herd of Angus cattle had wandered onto the HOA's common area, a patch of overgrown grass Karen claimed as her domain. By the time I'd rounded them up, she'd already slapped me with 3 fines: $500 for unauthorized grazing, $300 for property damage, and $200 for disturbing the peace. The peace she had disturbed by cutting my fence. I repaired it, added more cameras, and waited. The next week, my trail cameras caught her red-handed. At 2:17 a.m., there she was with Carl, snipping through the wire like they were on a covert mission. Karen wore a black tactical vest with HOA enforcement embroidered in bright yellow, moving with the confidence of someone who thought she was untouchable. Carl trailed behind, holding bolt cutters and looking like he'd rather be in bed. I sent the footage to the sheriff's office, but the response was the same: "We'll look into it." No action, no follow-up. Then my cattle started disappearing. First, one steer vanished, no tracks, no signs of struggle, just gone. 3 days later, another was missing. I filed police reports, but the deputies were oddly reluctant to investigate. I dug deeper and learned Karen's nephew worked dispatch, filtering calls and tipping her off. Everything clicked when I saw her post in the private HOA Facebook group. "Farm-to-table dinner this Saturday. Fresh, locally sourced beef for board members and guests." The photo showed her in an apron, standing next to a commercial freezer, her smile as cold as the meat inside. I started connecting the dots. Over the past year, 3 other residents with acreage had reported missing livestock. Tom Bradley lost 6 chickens, found feathers scattered near his coop, but no signs of predators. The Johnson family's prize-winning goat vanished from a lock pen, the lock neatly cut. Old Mrs. Chen's miniature horse disappeared one night. Though Karen blamed coyotes, the pattern was clear. First came the HOA violations fines for grass height, improper fence colors, unapproved livestock shelters, then the harassment late-night inspections, threatening letters, mysterious property damage. Finally, the animals would vanish, and soon after, the HOA would host a community dinner with remarkably fresh meat. I spent the next week documenting everything, building a case like I did in my narcotics days. Financial records showed the HOA's entertainment budget had ballooned by 400% since Karen took over, with thousands spent on community building exercises that were just her farm-to-table dinners. She was pocketing the difference between the stolen meat and what she claimed to spend on catering. Her operation was slicker than I'd imagined. She had spotters, neighbors she bribed or intimidated who reported when homeowners left town. She knew the police patrol schedules, thanks to her nephew. She even had a contact at a local processing plant who butchered the stolen animals. After hours, no questions asked, I decided to set a trap. I made a show of leaving for a weekend camping trip, loading my truck with gear and chatting loudly with neighbors about my plans. I even posted about it on social media. Knowing Karen, monitored the whole group. Then I doubled back through the woods, set up a blind near my pasture, and waited with my trail cameras rolling. Sure enough, at 11 p.m., I heard the rumble of 4-wheelers. Karen had brought reinforcements, this time 3 men I didn't recognize, all wearing those ridiculous HOA enforcement vests. They moved with military precision. Using hand signals and night vision goggles, they targeted Bruno, my biggest steer, a 200-pound Angus I'd raised from a calf. I watched, heart pounding, as they shot him with a captive bolt gun, the kind used in slaughterhouses. It was professional, cold, and efficient. That led me to that moment in the grass, watching Karen drag Bruno's butchered remains across my property line like she owned it. But she'd made a fatal mistake. She assumed I was just another retiree. She could steamroll. She didn't know about my 20 years in narcotics, my training in surveillance, or my knack for building airtight cases. And she definitely didn't know about the phone call I'd received that morning. Jake, the mayor had said, his voice warm and welcoming, just wanted to personally congratulate you. We're thrilled to have you as our new chief of police. Starting Monday, the whole department's looking forward to working with you. I kept my new role quiet, wanting to settle into Pine Valley before taking the badge. But now, watching Karen and her crew load Bruno's remains into her husband's truck, I knew the time for settling in was over. The next morning, I didn't approach her as Jake Morrison, retiree. I walked up to her door as Chief Morrison, badge on my belt, flanked by 2 deputies and armed with a search warrant signed by a judge who'd reviewed my evidence and was just as fed up with Karen's reign as I was. Her face when she opened the door was priceless. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opening and closing like one of the fish she'd stolen. This is HOA business, she sputtered, clutching her badge. You have no authority here. I held up the warrant, my voice calm but firm. Ma'am, theft of livestock is a felony in this state. So is criminal trespass, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit agricultural crimes. We found everything. The search was a gold mine. Her garage held 3 commercial freezers packed with butchered beef, each package labeled with HOA inventory stickers and dates. Her home office was a nerve center of her operation, detailed maps of my property, with areas marked for resource extraction, a folder labeled Hostile Homeowner Acquisition Strategy with my name on it, and dossiers on every resident with more than 2 acres. My file was 3 inches thick, filled with surveillance photos, a psychological profile labeling me as non-compliant, and a 5-year plan to force me out through escalating HOA pressure. The deep freeze in her basement was like a crime scene. Vacuum-sealed packages of meat were meticulously labeled. Tom Bradley free-range chicken, Johnson family goat, trophy grade, Chen miniature horse, tender. She'd been running a black market butcher shop out of her suburban home. Her computer was even more damning. Emails with board members detailed their raids on my property. Messages to a black market meat buyer in the next county showed profit. Margins from selling my fish to local restaurants under the HOA as tax-exempt status. An encrypted folder labeled insurance policy contained videos of city officials at HOA dinners, clearly intoxicated, accepting cash envelopes and making compromising statements. She'd been building leverage over anyone whom I challenged. Her .1 email thread, titled The Morrison Problem, revealed her fear of me. He's not like the others, she wrote, military or law enforcement background certain. Recommend immediate aggressive action before he establishes community support. Livestock acquisition will send a clear message about HOA authority. She'd underestimated me, and it was her downfall. As we led her out in handcuffs, she screamed about HOA sovereignty and her right to enforce community standards. Carl just stood there, looking more relieved than anything, like he'd been waiting for someone to end her reign. The story hit the local news that evening. HOA, president arrested in cattle rustling scheme. By morning, it had gone viral. Karen's mugshot, her president pin still clipped to her jacket, became an internet sensation, shared with captions like "When the whole Karen gets what's coming." The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Theft, embezzlement, fraud, extortion. Karen had used her position to terrorize residents into selling their properties cheap to a shell company registered in her maiden name. 7 families had been forced out, their homes sold at auction to her cronies. The judge, who'd clearly dealt with his own HOA nightmares, showed no mercy. 20 years for organized theft of livestock, he read, his voice steady. 10 years for racketeering, 5 years for abuse of fiduciary duty, to be served consecutively. 35 years total. Karen's composure cracked, for enforcing community standards. She shrieked, her voice echoing through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, his eyes hard. No, ma'am, for being a criminal who thought plastic badge made you above the law. As they led her away, she turned to me one last time, her face twisted with rage, tears streaming down her cheeks. She mouthed something I couldn't hear over the courtroom noise, but I didn't need to. The look of defeat in her eyes said it all. Pine Valley Estates was free, and I just started my tenure as chief of police with one hell of a bust.